second quarterly multi-sectoral roundtable of the year. As I mentioned, we're joined today by a stellar lineup of leaders from our sector working groups, along with special guests including Tessa Ferry from the UN Climate Champions team. Elly may still join us from Sunrise, and Glen, Klatovsky, the CEO at Climate Action Network Australia. As many of you know, Better Futures Australia is a non-partisan alliance aiming to represent climate champions across all corners of society and the economy. And together we're working to demonstrate broad support for ambitious national climate action and shift the national narrative of what's possible, and via collaboration with peers and the government, show readiness to work together to over-deliver on Australia's climate commitments. And thanks to the efforts of many of you on this call, the recent change in government in May last year has already brought many new opportunities for climate action. Since we gathered in Canberra at the forum last September, we've seen many public consultation and other opportunities to get involved. 4 of Better Futures Australia's sector working groups have continued to meet quite regularly to coordinate around shared strategies and areas of work, and engage with government and other leaders towards shared goals. One of our key initiatives in the coming months is working with sector representatives on the production of a shared policy platform for Australia ahead of the global climate negotiations in Dubai this December. And that's why it's excellent that so many of you are here today to share what's on your agenda, what your priorities are, and also how we can work together with partner initiatives like the Sunshot Alliance that Cam and Dan are members of, and how we can all collectively direct our efforts for the greatest impact. So our agenda today begins with Tessa Ferry, who will share insights on the role of business leaders, subnational governments, and other what we refer to as non-state actors in the UN. In the upcoming global climate negotiations, the Conference of Parties 28. This will be followed, if Elly shows up, but hoping she's catching up on sleep, with a bit of a discussion around the May budget, federal budget, and what we can expect from that. And then Glen, Klatovsky, the CEO at Climate Action Network Australia, will discuss how we can all contribute in the lead up to the anticipated Australia Pacific COP31 in 2026. So following each speaker, we'll have a brief Q&A session. So do take note of any questions and use the raise hand function to participate. So following that, we've got a generous amount of time, hopefully, for the sector working groups to share their plans and activities and find areas where we can work together. So before I hand over to and introduce Tessa, I'd just like to do a run through of the sector representatives we have on the call. So if you could please give a wave and a smile when I introduce you, and then I'll just check if anybody is also on the call that would like to speak. So we had an apology from Uncle Ray Minikin. He sends his regards to everybody, but he's a bit crook today. So the Indigenous Peoples Organisation is still working towards their plans for COP26 this year to send a large delegation of First Nations voices to Dubai. We have Joe Sampson from the Land Use Futures Program at Climate Work Centre representing the Nature-Based Solutions Group today. Thanks, Joe. We've got Holly Jones from the Climate and Health Alliance. Thanks, Holly, representing the Health Working Group. Rowan Morey from Beyond Zero Emissions. Nope, can't see Rowan, and he'll be representing the Transport Working Group. We have Daniel Sherrill from the Australian Council of Trade Unions. Hey Dan, good to see you. And he'll give an update on the National Transition Authority work that's underway, and also some insights to the Sunshot exports work. We have Nishta from Climate Energy Finance, who'll give some updates on the corporate finance work. Coral Bravo from Climate Work Centre. Hi, Coral. And then also Monica from WWF will be joining. Hi, Monica. Good to see you. And Lex from Ironbark and Kathy Oak from University of Melbourne on the local government work. Did I miss anyone who would like to jump in with some updates today? Hi, Elly, good to see you. All right, thank you. I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker, Tessa Ferry. Tessa is a senior advisor to the UN Climate Champions team, focusing on policy and gender. She supports strategic engagement with non-state actors and governments, leads specific country engagements, and manages the gender portfolio. Prior to joining the Champions team, Tessa was head of international climate change for the Scottish government, leading preparations for COP26. COP28 this year in the United Arab Emirates will be Tessa's 6th UN climate conference. Tessa, we're thrilled to have you join us today to discuss COP28 that will include the crucial global climate stocktake process and share your insights to the role that non-state actors can play, all of us on the call representing non-state actors, and what we can do to work together to raise ambition throughout the global climate negotiations. Thanks so much for joining us, Tessa.
No problem. Thanks very much, Lisa, and thanks to everybody for having me. And yeah, as Lisa says, I'm joining you from Glasgow, so it's a little bit late, so bear with me if I stop making any sense at any point. I think I've only got 5 minutes. I'm going to try and share my screen and hope that this works. I would say that I've been working from home for about 3 years, and I still can't quite work out how to share a screen properly on Zoom. Can people see anything? Great. So I'll start just with a bit of an overview of the role of the climate champions. And apologies if you've already heard this or already know a lot of this. So the climate champions are mandated by the Paris Agreement to mobilize non-state actors in support of the goals of the Paris Agreement. There's always two champions, one representing the incoming presidency and one representing the outgoing presidency. So at the moment, we have Dr. Mahmoud Mohiuddin, who's the high-level champion for COP27, representing Egypt, and Her Excellency Razan Al Mubarak, who is the high-level champion for COP28, representing the UAE. Dr. Mahmoud's term will end in December, and Her Excellency Razan's term will end next December or next November, depending on when the COP is. So together, they oversee the mobilization of non-state actors and the what we call the Marrakesh Partnership, which is a forum for engagement and setting out climate action for non-state actors. We worked to a 5-year plan, which was agreed at COP26 in Glasgow. And the main aims are set out here. So it's about mobilizing and aligning non-state actors, strengthening collaboration, broadening and deepening engagement, tracking progress, and trying to build a shared narrative. The climate champions themselves are supported by the Climate Champions team, as well as the UNFCCC Secretariat. So I work on the Climate Champions team. We are a global team. So obviously there's a few of us in the UK, but we're increasingly trying to regionalize our presence. So we have an Africa team, we have a Latin America team, we have an India team. We're increasing our presence. I think in Asia will be a priority, and then we look to grow from there. So the climate champions try and mobilize action across all pillars of the Paris Agreement. So we work on mitigation, adaptation, resilience, and loss and damage increasingly, as well as trying to mobilize finance. And this year, working in those pillars, we have a number of key priorities, some of which I think will be really relevant to the work that you're looking to achieve. So underpinning everything that we're doing, we've got an increased focus this year on inclusivity, in particular on the role of women and girls in climate action. How do we empower people to come to the discussions that aren't always heard? How do we make sure solutions are really delivering for all people affected by climate change? And that's particularly a key priority for Her Excellency Razan. We're also looking at this year at the role of nature, I think particularly reflecting the fact that the Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed last year, and that we know that I think 30% of all mitigation actions is going to have to come from nature as well. So that's an increased priority, looking at food and ag, water, oceans, biodiversity and investment. We'll also be playing our part in the global stocktake, and this is a really important aspect and something where the champions have actually been asked by the parties to facilitate the engagement of non-state actors in the process. So as a sort of general rule, the high-level champions themselves don't negotiate. That's something for parties and governments. But in some of the key negotiations, there has been a request to facilitate non-state actor involvement. So we've been working to make sure that non-state actors are able to take part in the key discussions, and also looking within the climate champions and the non-state actor community, what does it mean for us? How do we really begin to kind of play our part? How are we increasingly tracking progress, really putting solutions at the heart of the discussion? And that's one thing I think that we would like to bring from the non-state actor community, is that focus on solutions, is that focus on implementation. Within our work on adaptation and resilience, we'll be advancing what we call the Sharm el-Sheikh Adaptation Agenda, which is a set of sectoral and natural system goals to try and mobilise action towards 2030. We're doing similarly on the mitigation side, which is around the breakthroughs. Again, these are kind of sectoral transformations. And the idea of these is that they identify short and medium term outcomes that kind of apply globally. And that any sector or any actor working in the sector can try and begin to look at how they can work towards these goals. And we're also looking as well at finance and how do we increase finance flows into developing economies and emerging markets. We have a number of campaigns that we work with. I think some of your members might be members of these. There's the Race to Resilience campaign, which is really focused on making 4 billion people more resilient by 2030. And then I'll come on just and very briefly, as I know we're probably out of time. One of our other campaigns is called Race to Zero. And the reason I just want to mention it is that I understand that Better Futures is a member of the Alliances for Climate Action, so it's a global set of partners. And the Alliances for Climate Action are an accelerator to the Race to Zero. And that means that there's an opportunity to really build the campaign, look at what it can do. And this campaign this year is really focused on supporting non-state actors to pledge net zero commitments, to publish their plans, and increasing to look at their advocacy and policy efforts and how does advocacy and policy really align towards net zero. And that's a critical priority for us this year. So there might be an opportunity to look at the work of Better Futures Australia and how it could potentially support some of these aims. I'll stop sharing there. I think probably it was only a brief overview of what we're doing, and happy to take in their questions, but I can share these slides afterwards if it's useful to have them in a bit more detail. And maybe I'll just leave it there. So we do have a newsletter. So if you ever want to know more, you can sign up to the newsletter. It's very easy.
Thanks so much, Tessa. I am subscribed. I can. I do have a habit of taking out the key bits of relevance and including in the BFA newsletter as well. So I haven't seen any hands raised. So if anybody has questions, please do raise your hand. But Tessa, I did want to ask. So it is the global stocktake. So all of the representatives on the call today, most are involved in organisations that have an advocacy focus. So the persuade of the 5 Ps would be a key one. Then there are some partner organisations as well that do play that partner role to the Race to Zero campaign to help businesses and subnational governments disclose their emissions through the city's Race to Zero and some business initiatives as well. So what would you recommend in terms of the role that they can play to really help the Australian government be a positive influence in Dubai this December?
Thanks, Lisa. So I think, some things that we're focusing on around the stocktake is the real need to, or the real opportunity perhaps, to recognise that I don't think anybody will be surprised this year if the stocktaker tells us that we're not on track. There's been a number of reports already, so it'd be very surprising, I think, if there was anything really different. But I think there is an opportunity to look at, well, what needs to change as a result of that, and where does the effort now need to build in terms of collaboration. And I think it's about really putting a collaborative spirit at the heart of things, putting solutions at the heart of things, and really building on the success of what non-state actors have been able to do as demonstration of real tangible progress. And looking at what that could mean in terms of both in the COP but outside the COP as well, and really kind of building on those partnerships. And I think delivering some of those messages is something that could be helpful. Just to flag, we are developing a kind of set of key messages, and we can share those with you once those have been agreed to, so you can see that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, thanks so much, Tessa. And one of the powerful messages for the Glasgow COP with the previous government and Prime Minister Morrison that we were reflecting on with the international community just a few weeks ago with a Climate Work Centre colleague was the States and Governments report that they produced, which showed that collectively the state and territory short-term emission reduction commitments went above the current government's 2030 emission reduction commitment. So those kind of messages are so powerful, and showing that subnational private sector ambition can over-deliver on the national commitments is so powerful. So we've got a question from iPhone in the chat. Not sure who that is, sorry. If you want to chime in, if you're commuting with noise, maybe not though, but are the Climate Champions team engaging with the Australian government, and what is the reception you are receiving if so?
No, thanks. That's an excellent question. So we do primarily engage with non-state actors. There has been some, I think, engagement in the margins meetings with the Australian government at senior level, and it has been positive. I know that there has been a discussion about I think in the past about SIDS, as that has been a priority as well, and I think particularly about how to mobilise action within the sort of Pacific SIDS region. So overall, it's been a sort of positive engagements. But I'd welcome, I guess, any thoughts about anything we can do together to maybe not necessarily with the government, but to kind of build up collaborations. I think particularly looking ahead to the next few COPs. I know they're not confirmed yet.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Tessa. And if anybody would like to get in touch with Tessa after today, please do reach out to me if you can't find her details directly. And yeah, it would be excellent to have those slides, Tess, and I'll share those around with everyone. But other than that, I think we'll give Tessa a thanks with the virtual applause, and let you toddle off to bed and get a good night's rest for all the important work that you're doing. Thank you so much, and thank you for taking the time to join us with that update. Look forward to seeing the outcomes of COP28 this year. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, Tessa. And next, we do have Elly Baxter on the call. So thank you so much, Elly, for joining us, considering the night that you've had. I hope that you did manage to get some sleep. Thanks, Elly.
No worries. Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, all good.
Yeah, I'll just give you a quick intro, Elly, because you are a very stellar representative in the Australian climate movement. So Elly provides some really excellent advice on communications and media. So she's an accomplished communications professional with over a decade of experience in managing marketing and PR campaigns. And her advice around key moments like the federal budget is really well respected and acknowledged. So Elly, given the progress we've seen since May last year with the change in government, and including considerations around what we saw with the government's mini budget in October and recent developments, we're really eager to hear your insights on what we can expect next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great. Thanks for that intro, Lisa. That's very generous. I have done a quick little slide, so I'll just share my screen. Similar to Tess, I'm still baffled by the whole screen sharing situation, but let's see if we can make this work. So just want to say at the outset that our team works specifically on energy. We're the Australian Energy Transformation Team, and our goal is to shift Australia to 100% renewable energy by 2030. So what I'll be looking at is specifically the energy space in the budget, which will be quite interesting, I think. There will also, I expect, to be some really interesting stuff in the climate and nature space, but that's not a focus of our program. So I'm sorry, I'm not across what might be in that package, but I do think that's one to look out for. So a few weeks ago, the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, said that cleaner and cheaper energy will be central to their growth strategy in this budget. What's kind of not clear in terms of what that means is there was obviously in the last budget, there's the $20 billion Rewiring Australia package on transmission and some other really big investments in renewable energy. We're not sort of clear if there will be similarly big announcements of new funding for those sorts of big infrastructure projects in this budget, or if it'll be more kind of a bit more indication of where that money is going. So that's sort of something to look out for. What we do know will be in the budget is the Energy Bill Relief Fund that was announced back in December, and that will be targeted support payments for people who are on job seeker, on the age pension, disability support pension, and family tax benefits. And that will be emergency relief that will kind of go directly off people's power bills, which I think is so important. Everyone is struggling, and those groups who will be receiving those payments are really making very, very difficult choices at the moment. And we'll absolutely support the government in stepping up and assisting those people in a really rapid way. What we will also be calling for is to make a similar investment in rooftop solar, particularly on social housing. So housing that the government already owns is so ripe to get those solar panels on there for a similar sort of investment that we're seeing from the federal budget this time round. They could put solar on 250,000 social homes. And then those families would be seeing $750 on average as a saving every year for the life of those solar panels. So that's kind of our key message, that the government is doing a wonderful thing. They're supporting people who really need that support. Now we need to see that investment going into rooftop solar that will mean that people are seeing those savings year on year on year, not just as a one-off. So some other things in the energy space already announced is some additional tax deductions for small businesses to improve energy efficiency, which is great. We're always looking for ways to improve efficiency, and potentially with induction cooktops mentioned there, getting gas out of businesses and homes. We know that there was a deal that the Greens brokered around passing the price caps back in December that will do something for households, targeting low-income people and renters, energy efficiency, and potentially also getting off gas as part of that as well. We're very low on detail on what's in that package because in the terms of budget cycle, it was only brokered in December, which is very late. So it might even be that that's a smaller package in this budget, and perhaps there'll be further announcements with regards to that package. We're just not quite sure. The other thing that we're expecting is a energy transition authority. It sounds like Dan, who's on the call, might be talking about this more later. Very, very strong indications that that will be in the budget, which is fantastic. It's so important that those workers and communities are supported through this transition. And the things we'll be interested to see is, will it be, a national authority? Will it be targeted to particular regions? And what sort of considerations and funding will there be in terms of knock-on impacts of changes within local economies and the kind of scale of work that authority will be undertaking. The capacity investment scheme, a really wonky one. You might remember a while ago, there was a thing called Coalkeeper, which we managed to quash. And so the energy ministers announced the capacity investment scheme last year. It's basically an auction that will mean that energy providers will be paid to provide firming services to the grid. It gets very technical, but basically it means that there'll be some money to invest in storage like batteries and pumped hydro into the future, which will help stabilise the grid as we move to more renewables. And then there's the petroleum resource rent tax. There's been a few kites flown about tightening up the settings for oil and gas companies that are harvesting resources offshore. So that would definitely be a really good reform. They're obviously paying nowhere near their fair share, and anything that can come into the budget that potentially can be redirected to supporting people in a pretty gnarly cost of living crisis would definitely be a good thing. So as ever, budget is a bit of a kind of forecasting, clairvoyant work, a bit of educated guesses. So don't hold it against me if we've got anything wrong, but this is kind of what we're expecting and what we're looking for in the budget. And if you've got any questions or you'd like to talk through things that you're expecting or messaging that you would like some help with, please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Elly. I know you've got to run off to a training today, so we might not have questions on the call, but I did just want to say that, noting the Energy Focus, the Smart Energy Council conference and exhibit is underway in Sydney today, so hopefully we'll see some announcements that are feeding into the budget narrative as well today and tomorrow. So please do reach out to me if you would like to follow up on anything Elly has mentioned, and hopefully it's okay, Elly, if I can connect you.
Yes.
But otherwise, thank you so much for all of the amazing work that you and the team at Sunrise are doing, and thank you for taking the time to join us today.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Elly. And now I have the wonder to introduce you to Glen, that I'm sure doesn't need an introduction for most of you. So Glen, for those that don't know, Glen has a background in the environment and climate advocacy space spanning over 30 years. And Glen, we're curious about the whispers we're hearing about the Australia Pacific COP31 that will be held in 2026. Please do share with us your perspective on how we all, as representing lots of initiatives and alliances and organisations beyond what is seen as the traditional climate movement in Australia, how we can all play a role in contributing to shaping Australia's climate ambition as part of that lead up to 2026 global climate negotiations. Thanks, Glen.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks, Lisa. Are you able to hear me okay? Good. So that was really interesting about the budget. I think it's quite an important budget to see where the Australian government is directed. One of the things I'm keen to see is the changes on the petroleum resource rent tax that are being proposed. The reason I raise that, and it's a really good segue, is because we've got a government now that has taken some climate action, which is good. We've helped support, pushing the ambition of their commitments that they made during the election, but we all know it falls well short. One of the things that they have spoken about significantly, and for anyone who went to Sharm el-Sheikh last year, you will have seen Minister Bowen in particular running around really pushing for Australia to co-host the 2026 COP, the big global UN climate meeting that happens at the end of each year, co-host that with Pacific Nation partners. The prospects of us hosting that, and this is an Olympic-size event, It goes for 2 weeks. There'd be 50,000 or more people present for that period of time, just for the actual meeting. The prospects are quite good that Australia will co-host with Pacific partners. We think it's well over 50% chance. There's one other bidder who may get it, which is Turkey. And that negotiation process is going on at the moment. For a little context, Climate Action Network globally is the official civil society partner of the UNFCCC, the UN body that manages climate change at a global level. So we have quite a central role to play in all COPs, bringing civil society representatives to those negotiations, and not just those big meetings, but all of the meetings throughout the year leading up into it. In light of the fact that we think there's a good chance that Australia will be co-hosting in 2026, this enormous event, we have developed a scoping study on the potential of this particular event to change Australia's position from being a climate laggard to being a climate leader globally. There's a statement that I think rings true, is that any country that hosts a COP changes forever. Our goal is to bring civil society to the fore throughout this entire period of time, 3.5 years roughly from now. And that's not just civil society in Australia, but civil society in the Pacific as well. And that's CANA's real priority. The scoping study has demonstrated that while there are some risks around preparing for a potential COP, the benefits are huge. And for all of us here who represent civil society, there has never been a better opportunity than the potential hosting or co-hosting of a COP to influence Australian government policy. So from our perspective, we need to plan right now about how we take best advantage of that. Noting that, firstly, we're not guaranteed to get the COP. And secondly, that even if we get it, there will be many other forces attempting to influence the way that that COP is run and the outcomes that it produces. If Australia was to co-host, say with a Pacific nation partner, which is the project, Australia and the Australian government would be the owner of the international negotiations for a year, but also would be heavily planted in subsequent periods, particularly the 12 months after, as you're seeing with the UK government since they hosted Glasgow in 2021. It's getting fast past us. Our scoping study looks at all levels of engagement, but this particular grouping, represented by Better Futures Australia, is an incredibly pivotal one. The goal of the traditional climate advocacy movement has been to bring as many climate advocacy voices into the Australian sphere as possible, and this is a major component of it. And that has been incredibly successful, as we hear more and more people around Australia who aren't, members of, particular climate advocacy organisations, but who represent real interests, people who've been affected by climate impacts, people whose businesses are impacted by changes on climate policy and so on. As many of those voices as possible to bring up the temperature, literally, in the political sense, to get the Australian government to become more ambitious. So we will share that report once it's finalised, which should be in the next week. For anyone who's interested in having a look at it, there's a series of recommendations in an executive summary, and also I'm available at any time to have a discussion about it.
Thanks so much, Glenn. We've got a comment from Rowan at Beyond Zero Emissions in the chat that I just thought worth noting, that Beyond Zero Emissions published the Laggard to Leader report back in 2012. So one point to note is that these kind of global events, if hosted in
Indeed.
Australia, are the moment to bring out
These
those
are
reports that have been the dust collectors for the last decade. So
always these are always a decade ahead of everyone else.
Yes. So thanks for making that comment, Rowan. And there's a lot of other really stellar reports and modelling out there that now is our chance to bring that out and update it and start implementing. Now we've moved on to the not why, but how. Okay, so we've also got a question here from Luke. Love the idea of COP moving us from laggard to leader. Do you have a sense of the Pacific partner? Fiji seems likely. Perhaps not in the current political climate, or would it be co-hosted with the region?
It's very hard to tell. So someone else pointed out the Pacific Islands Forum, and we are going to be deeply engaging with that. We have just appointed a Pacific campaigner in the CANA team. We have deepening engagement with the Pacific Islands Climate Action Network, including financial relationships supporting their civil society work. I think that's really important. In terms of the co-host, it's very interesting. Fiji co-hosted with Germany in 2014. That was seen by many as a failed co-hosting. There are, of course, issues with Fiji in terms of their leadership and the range of issues that Fiji's faced. My expectation is it won't be one nation. It might be across the Pacific Islands Forum nations. I think the other likely candidate, if it is one nation, would be Vanuatu, in particular in the context of the case that they just brought to the International Court of Justice at the UN and their other advocacy. I think there are a high likelihood, and the Vanuatuan government was in Canberra not that long ago and sought and gained endorsement for that campaign and a range of other activities. This is also a real opportunity to get Australia to step up in terms of climate finance, climate adaptation, loss and damage, both regionally and globally. So there's a whole range of policy outcomes that we need to start to prioritise out of this. Just one last thing. There are rumours that there may be an announcement about who's hosting COP31 at this year's COP in Dubai. That would be a bit unusual, quite early. We still haven't been told who's going to be hosting COP29 yet, which is next November. So, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, that would be unusual, but also exciting. So let's cross our fingers and toes. Any last questions for Glen before we move on to the sector updates? And Glen, we'd love to have you stick around for part of that discussion if you've got the time today. Any last questions for Glen? No? All right, let's keep this discussion rolling then. So we'll shift our focus to our stellar sector leaders representing so Uncle Ray sends his apologies for Indigenous Peoples Organisation, but I did mention there's a lot of First Nations organising happening in the lead up to the COPs to keep boosting that Indigenous voice in those global negotiations. Climate Action Network Australia has some great networks. If there's any interest in partnering there, please do reach out. We've got Joe, who'll speak on nature-based solutions, land planning work, Holly on health, Rowan for transport, Dan, National Energy Transition Authority, and Dan and Cam, hopefully you can give a bit of a sunshot renewable exports update too. And then we've got Nisha and Monica on corporate finance and a few others on the call too. So hoping between us we can start to delve into some of the opportunities and challenges we're facing, sector specific, but also economy-wide, and the potential solutions and advocacy opportunities in the next couple of months in the lead up to this year's COP, and how we can all, combine our efforts to work towards our shared goal for a climate resilient and better zero emissions future. So I will start by handing over to Joe Sampson at the Climate Works Centre to give us an update on how the conversations and planning is going with the Nature-Based Solutions Working Group. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Lisa, and hi everyone. Great to see you all. So we just very recently established a working group in collaboration with Jen Bowick from Pew. Hi, Jen, nice to see you there, and a few others. Focus on nature-based solutions with the objective of influencing the direction and development of national scale strategies and policies that promote nature-based solutions to support the realisation of both climate and nature goals. The impetus for establishing this group was our recognition that Australia needs to take steps to leverage the potential of nature-based solutions for climate strategies, realise the co-benefits of aligned climate and nature policy, and also minimise trade-offs. So there's a number of expected outcomes that we've identified. At the process level, we are aiming to increase understanding of the interconnectedness of climate and nature-related strategies and outcomes within the climate movement, government and industry stakeholders, to develop or promote improved clarity on both the potential and the limitations, including the uncertainty of nature-based solutions as a climate solution, and the central role of land use change and implications for other sectors' targets to realise its potential. We would really like to see the discussion advance beyond market mechanisms and offsets as the primary mechanism for promoting nature-based solutions to a fuller and longer-term view of levers for change, and see tangible steps being identified for scaling nature-based solutions in Australia as part of both climate and nature strategies. So at the high, sort of more impact level, ultimately we would like to see land use and ecosystems management strategically integrated and optimised within national climate strategy, greater alignment and integration of biodiversity, climate mitigation and adaptation objectives and land use planning, and inclusion within a broader assessment of budget decisions, in particular government investments, and also greater support for the rights, interests and knowledges of Indigenous peoples and land and ecosystem management for nature and climate outcomes. One potential focus area that we are exploring is supporting and or advocating for the development of a national framework for nature-based solutions. And this might be building off, some things which we've seen in other countries like the US. So such a framework would take into account the required changes in land use planning, restoration and management, while integrating biodiversity, climate mitigation, adaptation, and so on. As I mentioned, we are still quite early on. So we're still sort of figuring out a number of issues related to this, but regarding cross-sectoral collaboration, we'd certainly be interested in how we can help increase the recognition of nature's role in climate solutions and its implications for other sectors, and we're interested in tracking this and influencing through joint advocacy. And regarding budget, again, this isn't fully established. We haven't fully established this, but this often may simply include making the case for nature-based solutions to be considered eligible for existing or new funding as part of climate strategy. So I think that's about it from me. At this point, we're meeting bi-monthly. We're only just sort of getting going. So welcome interest from others and, opportunities to collaborate, certainly.
Thanks so much, Jo. And we have had some interest from corporate finance for some cross-sectoral collaboration already. So hoping we can get some shared activities off the ground there. So please do, as we hear from the sector reps, make any notes and questions, and we will have time to have a bit of Q&A and discussion following the round of updates. So next up, we have two new faces to the Better Futures Australia community. So sorry to pick on you early in the lineup, Holly, but hoping you can give us a bit of an update on the health working group. And you've also got the support of colleagues Kate and Denise from Doctors for the Environment Australia also on the call. So do feel free to call on them for support with this update. Nice to meet you, Holly.
Thank you, Lisa. And hi, everyone. I'm Holly, and I'm really new at the Climate and Health Alliance, working in policy and advocacy. I'm literally going to read the notes that Roland has given me from today. So Kate and Denise, I appreciate your input if you've got some. Thanks. I'll probably just broadly let you know that the draft working group goal for the health sector is to see broad engagement of the health sector to work with government and across sectors to implement an impactful national health and climate strategy and sustainable healthcare unit that works to raise Australia's ambition on climate out to COP31. I understand the group is meeting quite regularly, I think 3 weekly. it brings together a number of peak bodies, research organisations and groups within climate and health. So it's groups like us, the Climate and Health Alliance, Australian Healthcare and Hospitals Association, the George Institute, Melbourne Climate Futures, etc. It's already quite an organised sector and lots of participants that are happy to be kept informed through peak bodies which they already belong. And we're also involved with some Indigenous peak organisations. The focus of the group is coordinating the work across programs and identifying key events that we can use to advance the approach used through Better Futures. For example, the Better Healthier Futures Day at last year's forum. In terms of advocacy priorities and planned activities, probably looking at core messages around sustainable, resilient, low emissions healthcare sector. And probably the big opportunities around cross-sector collaborations that people might be interested in that we'd love to keep talking to people about. Number one, the National Climate and Health Strategy, which is one of the 3 big things going on at the moment. And we had a great session with the new unit in the Commonwealth talking about some of these ideas yesterday, as well as the wellbeing economy, which we'll hear more about later in the year, and the National Climate Risk Assessment. So thinking about how we can weave the health messages and issues through all those 3 big policy issues. And I'll probably leave it there at the moment. I'd really welcome anything specific from Kate or Denise if you had something you wanted to add. Thank you.
Thanks, Holly. Nice to meet you. I might just jump in very, very briefly. I mean, yep, you pretty much covered that comprehensively. The health working group has been, this year we're sort of looking at how to sort of drive some really specific outcomes. So one of the particular areas that we're looking at is how we can promote or develop health wellbeing indicators really specifically so that we actually have policy levers in there. And that's, so we're sort of Roland and one of the other members of the working group are putting a proposal for that at the moment. So we might have an event coming up pretty soon.
Thanks, Denise. We're having a quick catch up with not Catherine, but Belle on her first ideas around that event. Thank you for
Great,
reminding me.
fantastic.
Cheers.
Thanks, Holly, and thanks, Denise. And yeah, Belle is also based at the University of Melbourne Climate Futures, and we've also got Kathy Oak with the local government perspective on the call today. So yeah, lots of crossover and friends across different organisations here. So it's still a bit of a small bubble, this climate space, but also a good thing because it's easy to track down potential collaborators. So thank you for that. And next up, I'll invite Rowan Morey from Beyond Zero Emissions to give a bit of an update on the awesome activities in the Transport Working Group. We've seen a lot of things being shaken up there. So thanks for joining us, Rowan.
No worries. Thanks, Lisa. So yes, at the moment, the Transport Working Group meets once a month, and we have lots of different members that meet. And we normally discuss a key topic and get a guest speaker along. We also have 2 subgroups that meet more regularly. So the last 6 to 12 months, we've had an active transport subgroup and one working on the fuel efficiency standards. And quite a big win recently with the fuel efficiency standards being now announced as part of the National Electric Vehicle Strategy. That was unveiled a few weeks ago. It's going into a 6-week consultation. So we're sort of working on how we're going to tackle that in the best way possible as a group at the moment. Unfortunately, out of the National Electric Vehicle Strategy, 11 of the 16 measures are pre-existing, so there's not a lot of new announcements. And I'll share an article that Audrey, one of our fellow members from the Smart Energy Council, has on the web about what the NEV strategy misses out on. And so in terms of the fuel efficiency standards, that the submissions are open until the 31st of May. And I assume that there'll be some of the there'll be some guidance on how you can support that from the Electric Vehicle Council. We'll have some more updates on that. So if you're wanting to make a submission and just keep it a one-pager for fellow support, that would be great. Also, mark your calendars for a zero emission transport symposium on Brisbane on the 22nd of August. So that's the day before the CANA conference, where Professor Jago Dodson will be discussing decarbonising the transport sector. So the next scheduled meeting for our transport working group is on the 18th of May. We can contact James for further details. And lastly, on any budget announcements, it doesn't look like there will be a lot in terms of supporting the rollout of a national electric vehicle strategy. So as there's a lot of already pre-existing measures as part of that. So I guess we'll find out next week, but and the fuel efficiency consultation is ongoing. So and that's more of a regulatory measure. So I don't think there'll be as much in terms of budgetary measures either. There was some mention of doing a review of major transport infrastructure projects. And so we're keen to see what happens out of that and whether that will affect the rollout of some active and public transport infrastructure projects. But that looks like the consultation is going for a 2-month period at the moment. So I'm not sure if that'll align with the budget announcements or not. We'll find out next week. Thanks, Lisa.
Excellent. Thanks, Rowan. Fingers crossed that the budget announcements do have some more to implement there. And yeah, if any groups would like to do some shared submissions to that consultation on the fuel efficiency standards, do reach out and we'll put something in under the BFA logo if you'd like. So next up, I'd like to invite Dan from the Australian Council of Trade Unions to give a bit of an update on the National Energy Transition Authority, and also if you'd like to share anything around the Accenture Renewable Exports report, if we can expect anything around that. Thanks so much for joining us, Dan.
Sure. Good to meet everybody. Most of you I have not met. In September last year, I only moved to this country in September.
Dan, sorry, we're just having a bit of trouble hearing you. I'm not sure if it's just my audio, but
yeah, I'll get headphones, go to the next person and go back.
Okay, excellent. Thanks, Dan. All right, so I will maybe throw to Cam then. Cam, if you're there.
Yeah, hi all.
Thanks, Cam.
I can give you just a quick update maybe on the Sunshot piece. I'm a bit woolly, having just had a couple of weeks off, so looking forward to seeing what the 9th might bring us. I guess, Dan, in the Sunshot piece, we did an update of our report that we released and then did a subsequent piece, obviously, at the BFA conference last year. So I guess what we were wanting to really underline were, in essence, 3 things. One being the Energy Transition Authority and the importance of that, which Dan will talk about in more detail in a minute. 2, the importance of a coordinated, so this is recognising that it needs to be a cross-ministerial, cross-departmental piece of work around what a renewable powered export strategy for Australia needs to look like, particularly given the global context of the Inflation Reduction Act and CBAMs in the EU, the initiatives in Japan, Korea, even petrostates such as Saudi unleashing rivers of cash from their sovereign wealth funds to flow to renewables and hydrogen projects. So given all of that, what does Australia's response look like, and how can it be really targeted and coordinated and effective to land the finance necessary and to ensure that we are getting the capturing the opportunity of this in the global transformation that's occurring. So that's really the key ask, and within that, acknowledging that as the net zero task force, for example, as a central sort of group within the federal government at the moment, sort of evolves from its role around the Energy Transition Authority. Is there potentially a role for that that sort of structure moving forward into this export space? So that's that. And then the other piece that we really wanted to underline is that, of course, none of this is necessary unless we achieve the necessary speed and scale of the energy transformation at a domestic level. So certainly we're concerned about the pace of build out at the moment for us to achieve the 82% that would be the outworking of the current NDC, which is not 1.5 aligned. So we need to do much more and much faster, and really wanted to again underline the importance of a really strong coordinated effort. This is not just down to individual states to deliver. This has to be a nationally coordinated effort to deliver. Otherwise, we're going to fail. And it's going to be expensive, and it risks locking in a lot of gas. So I guess they're the sorts of things that we really wanted to sort of surface a little bit through the Sunshot budget submission that we did. And we're looking forward to seeing what happens out of the 9th. But I'll throw back now. I can see that he's got his earbuds in. I'll throw back down to Dan to talk about the Energy Transition Authority.
Thanks, Cam. Can you hear me okay now? Great. Sorry about that, y'all. This laptop has been giving me issues, but good to meet everybody. Most people I haven't met yet. I'm the senior advisor for climate, the Australian Council of Trade Unions, which is the peak body for unions in Australia. As you can probably tell, I'm not from this country. I moved here recently from the US, where I was heavily involved in the ultimate passage of the Inflation Reduction Act. So what Cam has spoken about with the clean exports opportunity here in Australia is there is an opportunity for job creation there on a prorated scale that is even greater than the Inflation Reduction Act, and we are very excited about seizing that opportunity here, and making sure those are good family supporting middle class jobs and not exploitative McDonald's jobs. But on the National Energy Transition Authority, so this is for folks who've been in the Australian climate space far longer than I have. You probably remember the union movement talking about this like a decade ago, and then we had a decade of coalition government and nothing moved. But the basic premise here is pretty simple. The transition to net zero by 2050 is arguably the biggest structural adjustment of the 21st century, and it poses manifold opportunities, as Cam laid out, for job creation, for prosperity, for protecting families from climate disaster. It is also poses a lot of risks, particularly to the Australian economy, which is unique in the developed world in its reliance on coal. 91st, it ranks 91st on the list of economic complexity worldwide, tied with Namibia. So we are very, very vulnerable to a chaotic, unjust transition that would see the bottom fall out of large swaths of the Australian economy and the regions whose prosperity has been based on extractive fossil fuel economies. We obviously need to transition away from those economies as fast as possible. We also obviously do not want to let those regions and those workers enter into an economic death spiral, because that will be very, very bad for the social license we need to maintain over the next 3 decades to get to net zero. Not to mention just like the raw human suffering. So we need to get this right. The national energy transition is about not just making sure no worker community is left behind, but also making sure that Australia's traditional energy regions we are leveraging the comparative advantage in those regions to help drive and make some of those regions into leaders in the net zero transition. And so there's a lot of detail there, but the basic function this authority would perform is twofold. One is to support workers and their families who have who are currently putting food on the table in high carbon industries, because government policy is rendering those industries uneconomic, as it should, to make sure those workers are taken care of and not thrown on the scrap heap. The other part is making sure that we are investing actively, essentially doing industry policy in these regions to drive new industries and create new job opportunities in a coordinated, proactive, long-term way. All I can say now is that we're very hopeful that the government's going to make the right decision, and to watch this space over literally the next week. And hopefully we'll have something to celebrate. If we do have something to celebrate, it will be a massive win for both workers and the climate. That has been a decade and a half in the making. And I will say, politically, having as many people across the Australian climate movement celebrate that win as possible, if we do get a win, is really important for continuing to build the solidarity and the shared political Venn diagram that will make future wins easier and bigger. Like, this is the thing that unites everyone from the workers down in the coal mines to the radical climate activists who are trying to shut down the coal port in Newcastle. Like, we had both of those forces at a rally at a Rararing power station standing together the last week, like literally 6 days ago. That doesn't happen very often, so we need to take this opportunity to really celebrate that alliance and celebrate the fact that it delivered a big win. If, fingers crossed, we get a big win. So I'll stop there. I also, because we're so close to budget, I will unfortunately have to hop off soon after this, but if anybody has any burning questions, I'll stick around for a few minutes.
Thanks so much, Dan. Any quick questions for Dan before he runs off? No. If you do have any questions, just put them in the chat or chase me or Cam, and I'm sure we can collectively chase you, Dan, on those. So all the best for your campaign around the budget, and yeah, we will be on standby to help you celebrate.
Okay.
So thank you.
Fingers crossed.
Thank you.
And Holly, feel free to email me and I can get you those stats. Thanks, y'all. Bye.
Excellent. Thanks so much for the update. And Cam, a lot of great points raised there around, yeah, even the NDC and net zero by 2050 is not 1.5 aligned. So collectively, we've got a lot more work to do, including moving away from that language of net zero by 2050. So that is always a work in progress. So next up, I would love to invite, oh, yep, there you are, Nishta from Climate Energy Finance to give a bit of an update on behalf of the Corporate Finance Working Group. And we've also got Monica Richter from WWF who'll jump in to add to your update. Thanks so much for joining us, Nishta.
Yeah, my pleasure. Can you hear me fine? Yep. Lisa's been very mean this morning and throwing a couple of newbies in for the start, but this is one of those cases where I'm extremely happy to follow Cam and Dan both, because they've set the scene for what we're trying to achieve. So I've met some of you, but not all of you. I'm Nishta Agrawal from Climate Energy Finance. I work really closely with Tim Buckley. That's his new business. And so we are focused, again, directly on the climate, on the energy transition and accelerating capital at scale to achieve the energy transition. So I'll just give a couple of points and pass to Monica to sort of fill in the nature side and anything else I might have missed. So next month is the Quad Alliance meeting between, so the Quad Alliance is Australia, US, Japan, and India. And with Biden making his way to Australia, it's a good opportunity to sort of to leverage or discuss the energy transition there. As well, we're really focused on elevating India's climate needs. India as the largest democracy and as of this week as the largest population in the world. So I think that's a big need to sort of reshape what the Quad Alliance is for and elevate India's needs, which hasn't been a focus so far. Off the back of that, like, one of the areas that we're doing a lot of work in privately is shaping up Australia's response to the US Inflation Reduction Act. So opportunities for Australia to leverage its public financial institutions such as the CEFC, the Future Fund, National Reconstruction Fund, Export Finance, as some examples. The safeguard mechanism has just come through, and so that'll start in 2024. So just the beginning of that sort of ratcheted up journey. And what it does is brings carbon offsets integrity into closer focus, as well as hopefully an incoming like CBAM to protect our domestic industry. And again, that should work in conjunction with an IRA-like response from Australia. So those are some key things we're working towards. In the regulatory space, the Australian Sustainable Finance Taxonomy should be released this year, and that will define which activities or companies can access sustainable finance. As well, there are shifts with the ISSB, the TCFD, the TNFD, which all work to further regulate reporting on sustainability risks and exposures. Lisa, I also note you mentioned recently about a submission on greenwashing more generally. So that's something I hadn't heard too much about, but really keen to sort of support that, hopefully through the corporate working group. And that's all from me. I might pass to you, Monica, if you have something more to add.
Thanks, Nishta. Hi, everybody. Lovely to see you all this morning. So I guess from my point of view, for those of you who don't know me, I work at WWF in the Low Carbon Futures program and a project director for MECLA, the Materials and Embodied Carbon Leaders Alliance. So this is really accelerating interventions in the built environment to drive decarbonisation in the building materials. 40% of Australia's emissions are from the built environment, so we can get low carbon concrete, steel, aluminium, engineered timber, and start to look at regenerative materials that we use in our built form. Then we have some chance of accelerating decarbonisation initiatives. And I guess things that I find really exciting about the work that this collaboration, a bit like BFA, bringing different parts of the sector together to achieve change, is that industry is ready to move, particularly those on the demand side. Laing O'Rourke, Lend-Lease, Burback, Frasers, Stocklands at the big end of town are very ambitious about their commitments because they've been driven by the finance sector. They've set very ambitious targets. They have sustainability linked loans that drive their decarbonisation journey, and government has been behind. So the New South Wales government has launched, through their New South Wales infrastructure, their principles paper on decarbonising infrastructure, and Transport for New South Wales are also deeply engaging in this area and are putting really clear expectations in their procurement tender documents around procuring performance-based materials rather than prescriptive on these, concrete in particular, as well as steel. Where it intersects with the council working group, it's just interesting to note that we had a meeting of the council working group recently, and the councils are finding it hard to find in the market low carbon concrete because the government agencies are starting to ask for the low carbon concrete themselves. We talk about $78 billion of contracting in New South Wales, Victoria, Queensland, all around the state. So making sure that we send that consistent and clear demand signal is going to make a difference. And I guess the other thing around the councils is that the engineers and project managers who sign off on the projects are a bit skeptical, haven't used the different materials, the low carbon concrete materials before. It has a different curing time, it performs differently, it might even look differently. And so there's going to need to be some engagement to really help to educate them on that. And I'd love to sort of work with the local government working group and see how we can really accelerate that education piece for local councils. And then moving to the other program that we're focusing on is a really leaning heavily into steel decarbonisation in the region. So we have a new staff member on board, Nicole Weich, who came on at the end of January this year. And our focus is twofold. One is looking at how do we value add to the iron ore export industry in Australia to create, green iron through major investment in infrastructure, renewable energy, and value adding to iron ore exports, particularly to Korea and Japan. So we have a Korea-Japan working group that meets regularly to look at accelerating that decarbonisation in steel. And I guess that will feed into some of the work that we're thinking about with COP 31 and playing that leadership role as well. So there is a meeting of all the major sort of NGOs and think tanks looking at steel decarbonisation in Korea next week, and both Nicole and I will be going to that. So I mean, there's some very exciting technology that's happening in that space as well. And I guess a final point, just wearing my WWF hat more generally, is we're about to launch our new strategic plan. And in summary, the last 3 to 5 years ago, we talked a lot about innovation and embedding innovative thinking in our strategic plan. And for this strategic plan, our overarching themes around inclusive conservation, very much focusing on how we help to address the needs of First Nations communities and really engaging the conservation First Nation communities at the heart of our conservation program. And then underpinning all of our language is thinking about the regenerative economy. What does it mean to sustaining the economy, and conservation is no longer good enough. We actually need to be thinking about a regenerative economy. And I think that fits really nicely with the work of the health subgroup when you talk about the well-being economy. There's similar concepts and ideas. So I'm really looking forward to seeing. We don't know exactly what we're going to be doing in that space yet. There's a few things to work through, but I think there's plenty of opportunity to have that deep and wide engagement. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Monica. The next health working group meeting, I think Belle at University of Melbourne will be inviting along a fellow researcher to give some advice on the wellbeing indicators. So if you have any contacts or colleagues, or you yourself would like to be part of that conversation, please do reach out, and that's open to others on the call as well. And yeah, thanks so much, Nishta, for insights to the great work you're doing with finance. And just hearing all the acronyms you listed off reminded me that Glen and I, with colleagues at Climate Action Network Australia, had a conversation yesterday about the need to educate and engage the climate movement and those working on climate advocacy in understanding the finance and regulatory space there too, so we can really make sure that we putting the right settings in place there. So keen to continue that conversation. And Wei, I just wanted to give you a chance to chime in with any updates from Climate Work Centre in the corporate or potentially state and government space, state and territory government space as well. Thanks, Wei.
Yeah, well, obviously a lot of the work, a lot of the things have been mentioned. There's quite a lot of alignment there, given that Climate Works has, teams that are delivering work across 4 physical systems, that being energy, industry, cities, as well as food, land, and oceans, as well as the 3 enabling systems that we work in. So sustainable finance, sustainable corporates, and sustainable economies, which speaks to the political institutions that we work within. The couple of things that I thought I might mention is that instead of going into detail about what each team is doing, and there's some representatives from quite a few of the teams on the call as well, at Climate Works, probably one thing I'd say is we are having a focus on sectoral pathways and scenarios, and later this year we will be releasing scenarios that are similar to decarbonisation futures, which some of you might be familiar with. Those were released back in, I think, 2020. And this focus here is really around making sure that looking at what a 1.5 aligned transition looks like for Australia and the various key economy or sectors within Australia, this really has an audience for both the public and private sectors as well. So in the sustainable economies team that I mentioned earlier, not just the pathways themselves, but the work that's been that has been ongoing within the team has really taken a focus on convening states and territories as well as the federal government to sort of understand what 1.5 alignment is, including looking at benchmarks that are taking place across various states, etc. And with the other sectors, probably more in the private sector side of things, we're probably taking an approach that's similar to the Australian Industry Energy Transitions Initiative, where we work closely with the private sector in developing these pathways and use that as evidence and information to influence or engage with government stakeholders where relevant, but also then work closely with the private sector itself in terms of turning attention from analysis to implementation. So there's the renovation pathways work, which got a bit of attention recently from the cities team, but then there's also in the sustainable corporates team doing some work with the New South Wales government on credible transition plans and to hopefully then inform and influence what mandatory corporate reporting looks like. The only other thing I might add there is we're also doing some work in Southeast Asia. So in Indonesia, for example, we're working with state-owned enterprises to also around providing a framework to help the financial regulator or auditor, if you like, around getting disclosures from state-owned enterprises, which actually cover more than half of the country's emissions, with a view of then being able to raise awareness and be able to implement decarbonisation plans amongst these enterprises. The other types of work that we have going on in Indonesia and increasingly likely to go to Vietnam as well has a stronger energy transition focus. And I did actually have a question around some of the things that were mentioned earlier around COP31 as to whether or not there's any scope or value in expanding that to influence Australia's position from laggard to leader, if you like, to our Southeast Asian neighbours as well, beyond just the Pacific. I'll just leave that as an open question. Not sure if anyone has any firm thoughts on that.
Thanks, Wei. I think there definitely is, and keen to build out that idea. So just to keep the updates going, and we'll come back, please do note any questions you have for Wei, Monica, Nishta, and others we've heard from. And I'd like to introduce Lex from Ironbark and Kathy Oak from University of Melbourne to give a quick update on the councils and cities working group. And then we will break for a Q&A and discussion. So yeah, lots of great ideas put forward already. So keen for that discussion. Thanks, Lex and Kathy, for joining us.
Hi,
Kathy, go.
Lex is on the phone, and oh, sorry, I'm just turning my camera. Sorry, we've got this. It's smooth in the local government working group. Lex, jump in, absolutely. I believe you probably got on the bus and got to work already, so you're ready to jump in. But yes, the local government working group has been very busy, of course. We had a recent strategy session in Melbourne, expertly facilitated as always by you, Lisa. This year, we're continuing our advocacy work from sort of building on the three asks that the BFA local government working group released last year and discussed at the conference last year, and one of the and I'll run through those again in a moment, but the key piece of work building on that has been the development of a local government informed research project and policy paper on multi-level governance for climate action. It's a project that's been led by Portia Adele and Chris White at Cities Power Partnership, and all of us have been contributing. It will be released in the next few weeks, and launched at the ALGA conference in June. and it's all about making the case for local government, for multi-level governance to accelerate climate action in Australia, with a case study on Australia's building sector. And I guess as a bit of a bit of a briefing on what that report and that research is saying around multi-level governance. It aligns with the 3 R's I was just mentioning, in that it is really focused on asking the federal government and all governments, but in particular our target audience is the federal government, and aligning with how the local government sector collaborates towards the climate conferences globally. It is now, focusing that collective action towards the federal government, with the 3 asks that these multi-level governance reports aligns to. The 3 asks being to establish a comprehensive climate policy framework that integrates all levels of government. Obviously, it's all about recognising that crucial contribution that local government make, and that recognition of that contribution in Australia's NDC. So, obviously we need to step up of what it does say at the moment. And the announcement last week of the revised urban policy framework is music to our ears, and hopefully this work and the work that ClimateWorks is also working on will help provide some more specificity there. The second ask is about establishing an effective partnership between local governments and the federal government. We're talking about an accord, defining shared objectives, strengthening climate mitigation, adaptation, resilience across all levels of government. Again, trying to really reinforce the importance of cities and local governments. And then, of course, appropriate resources to implement this, and really looking at a defined methodology to determine regionally specific investment in resilience and emissions mitigation costs, because it's a real barrier at the local government level, and yet we are playing such an important role in protecting communities to build back better from being that front line of so many of the extreme weather events. Specifically, this report does look at a case study around the built environment, and so there's some really clear recommendations to the federal government that we really want to see addressed, not only in the NDCs, but also in NDC, but also in the national urban policy and other pathways that are relevant for the built environment around standards and targets and codes to progress energy efficiency in the built environment, and obviously net zero cities. Sorry, I know we've only got a couple of moments. I've said already that report and policy briefing is looking to launch at the upcoming Australian Local Government Association National Assembly in June. There'll be a range of amplification and engagement activities and meetings. So any help on that, either sharing or sharing what we post, but also if you've got any opportunities that we can also speak to our perspective on multi-level governance, multi-level governance would be great. And then a key event this year in the lead up to the COP for the Local Government Working Group is getting involved in supporting Cities Power Partnerships City Summit in September. Again, it will be, I believe that the target audience for that event is CEOs and mayors, really trying to get the top end of cities and local governments to really reinforce this messaging around the importance of cities at this COP, but obviously earlier in this meeting we spoke about COP31 and really galvanizing how we can get a greater voice and, more importantly, a seat at the table. I think that's it. Lex, did I miss anything? Okay.
Thanks, Kathy.
Lex, there's nothing else to add.
Excellent. And yeah, just a few of the things you mentioned in there are up for review by the federal government this year, like the National Urban Policy Framework. So just yeah, around the event and the launch of the report that they've produced. It is an excellent piece of work, and some, as Kathy mentioned, specific recommendations for the built environment sector. And yeah, Chris and the other authors of that paper have done an amazing job. And it's a fine example of collaborating across many organizations. So very keen to have all of your support in amplifying that. So now I'd like to go to questions. So if any of you have specific points to follow up, I know that Wei raised an open-ended question around COP31 and the region. And Joe, I know a lot of your points have been referred back to in updates since then. So would anybody like to jump in with a question?
Can I ask a question of Kathy? Kathy, you mentioned the urban, what was it, the urban planning framework or the revised one? Could you explain that in a little bit more detail, please?
I'll put the link. So Australia's national urban policy, and so I've turned off my video. You're all frozen on my screen. I've got a really bad link. So tell me if you can't hear me. So yes, the national urban policy. Obviously, there's been a very limited focus of policy and investment in local governments for many years. You know, quite aligned to climate. But the new government made a commitment to refocusing on Australia's cities and regions, and there was an announcement last week. So we'd been anticipating it, but it was formalised last week. So it's the federal government's
bravo.
framework
That's great.
for working with.
And if you could put your email in the chat, so I'd like to reach out to you to talk about the embodied carbon stuff as well. That would be great.
Oh, awesome. Yes, of course. And
thank you.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. And we'll obviously have our multi-level governance report with the built environment case study in there ready soon. The Climate Council's comms team are making it look pretty right now.
All right, and then I have a question for Joe in terms of the nature-based solutions. I mean, we at WWF are experiencing, there's a lot of, well, the language around the superpower, rolling out the infrastructure, and the massive, seven-fold increase in infrastructure, transmission grids, and so on that we're going to see if we're going to meet that superpower vision does come with certain consequences for biodiversity, particularly around high conservation value areas. Is that working group focusing on any of that work at the moment around mapping those rich biodiverse areas, or are you focusing on how you sort of scale finance to best, or a bit of both? Just be interested to hear a bit more about that.
Yeah, thanks, Monica. It's certainly on our radar, I would say, in terms of the renewable energy, that sort of competition for land and so on. Yeah, but it's on our radar. I can't say it's been the main focus of our discussions so far. I think would be sort of open for sort of determining how we do consider how all of these issues do interrelate. I don't know, Jen, if you're still here, if you want to add your thoughts about. No, I think she's left. Yes, no, okay. And it's something which we have discussed with Stuart as well a little bit too. So I'd say at this point, not 100% clear how we will be addressing that.
All right, well, I'd certainly, I think it's really important as we build out our sort of strategic plan, which has a focus on sort of people and nature in particular. I'd love to sort of keep that, those lines of communication. And then I have one more question for Glen, if you don't mind. Glen, in terms of the COP31 leadership, I mean, what do you think it's going to take? I mean, what is Australia going to have to demonstrate to be kind of that leader? What are the 3 or 5 things that you think we're going to be asking for that will set us on that pathway?
I think that's an important question. I'll start by putting forward what we need to do as a collective to facilitate the outcomes that I'll then raise. So we need to continue to provide the space for climate leadership out of Canberra. That's a primary task, and one thing that will happen before the potential hosting of a COP is a federal election. You know, we need a federal parliament by the time there's a COP that is substantially stronger on climate action than we currently have. That means holding people to account and making sure that there's delivery, but it also means providing evidence that if you act on climate, you will be rewarded. And that includes both sides of politics. So we have a really strong intention right from the start that until we have both sides of politics on side on climate action, everything is tenuous. Everything is weak and could fall over overnight. So that's the first thing. Once we do that work, and that's civil society has a big job there, once we do that work, there's several things that I think will indicate Australia shifting from laggard to leader. One is our domestic arrangements. We need a rapid, fair and just transition to renewables and other technologies that decrease our emissions domestically as fast as possible, as fair as possible. That needs to accelerate, and that requires government, but it requires business, it requires, you know, all levels of sort of civil society engagement and so on. Second, we need to look at our role as a source of emissions. So that goes beyond our domestic and into our exports. So what is our ongoing role in terms of exports? If you have a look at the likely COPs coming up, this one coming is Dubai, then it'll be Central or Eastern Europe, then it'll be probably Brazil, although Colombia's bidding, and then it'll be us. The Brazilian COP is likely to have a lot of a focus on nature-based solutions, the Amazon, and so on. We would want the Australia Pacific COP to have a big focus on fossil fuels. So what's that mean? Well, that means that Australia and Australians need to contemplate our role as one of the major sources of fossil fuels exports on Earth. So a transition path out of that, led by a wealthy, capable country like Australia, but contemplating issues, for example, for Indonesia as a nation that's very close, has a huge coal sector and is not wealthy like we are. So how does that work as a regional example of the transition that needs to happen globally? And then finally, just the fundamentals of we're a wealthy nation. We got wealthy by pumping out emissions into the atmosphere. What are our responsibilities? So climate finance, climate adaptation money, loss and damage in the global funds, but also regionally. And with the Pacific being a geopolitical hotspot for at least the next few years, if not much longer, decades, Australia has multiple reasons to act to the benefit of the Pacific that go beyond climate. So if there's a shared COP with the Pacific, I hope and expect that the Pacific Island nations will push us hard on all of those elements. But our job is to provide the platform for those people who are making decisions on our behalf in Canberra, CEOs of corporations, etc., for them to feel confident that if they act on climate, they will benefit.
Thanks, Glenn, and great question, Monica. I'd just like to add some questions for all of you because you are all experts in your field and have some great networks behind you. Things that I've been thinking about with listening to people like Glen list off all of those great inspiring ideas for what it could look like we know that Brazil COP30 will be the COP that leads into the Australia Pacific COP if it happens. So that will potentially have a very large fossil fuel and nature focus. So what can we do to help shape that narrative and work on the diplomacy piece there? We know that global leaders, both private sector and public, have a huge role to play in the diplomacy and the narrative that's shaped. And just, I would ask all of you to start thinking now about who do we want to see? Minister Bowen, Minister Plibersek, Albanese, Senator Wong, who do we want to see them rubbing shoulders with? Who are the sector leaders in steel, in cities, in nature that we want standing alongside them and backing them in and showing that Australia is a leader and we can partner with Indonesia, we can partner with South Korea, we can work together on this and show that it is already happening and have those case study examples to celebrate. And then in addition to that, we had Mel from University of Technology Sydney on the call, and Climate Works is on the call, and other initiatives that are doing a lot of really critical work around emissions accountability already. So who are those guardians of accountability that can be the voice, the evidence to say, yes, we are actually tracking and monitoring our progress. We are holding the subnational governments, the private sector and the federal government to account. And we can say with confidence that we are on track to our zero emissions trajectory. So who is going to step up and do that work? Because we know that as advocacy climate movement, what we do really well is set the principles, the guidelines, the guardrails for what's required to be best practice. But who is actually there? Is it the Climate Change Authority? Is it someone else to actually hold these actors to account and make sure that we are practicing what we preach? So any examples like that we can really start investing in and building out and jointly advocating for would be incredible. So that's my thinking on that. Any other questions? So Wei, could we come back to your question potentially around the opportunities for region? And I know that Nisha, you likely have some ideas and thinking there too. So yeah, Wei, did you want to just repeat your question to everybody for us? Thanks.
I think Glenn sort of alluded to it as well in his response to Monica's question, which is to say, with the likelihood of Australia co-hosting COP31 with the Pacific, is there an opportunity to extend that beyond just the Pacific and think about our Southeast Asian neighbours in Australia taking a leadership position? I think fossil fuel exports is definitely one of that. The parallels between Australia's energy transition and some of the transition that we would hope for in a few key Southeast Asian countries. There's something there in terms of Australia demonstrating leadership. And if any others on this call have any further thoughts beyond that, would very much welcome those.
I don't have any specific thoughts that I can share. I should probably say that this year I've been very much down in the weeds of producing a couple of very specific reports, and I struggle to keep on touch of the breadth of things that both Tim and Anne-Marie are on top of. So that's for me to have that conversation a bit more before the next meeting.
And Nisha, the great work that you've done with Australia's big banks too, like there's a key piece there, I think, with, could Macquarie potentially play a role in this and other key voices? Monica, thanks.
Yeah, just to say, I mean, we shouldn't just limit it to Southeast Asia. I mean, Japan and Korea are our second and third largest foreign direct investors into Australia. They're also major financiers of coal-fired power stations in Southeast Asia. And as a result, they are investing in brown coal conversion, brown hydrogen, as they want to be able to continue the coal-fired power stations narrative in this region. So I think that I think the idea of having that kind of regional focus and the role that developed OECD countries play in continuing to finance fossil fuels is going to be a significant part of the conversation we have to have as we work in that area around getting out of fossil fuels. So I think that's good. But as you said, we have to start that work now and build that political capital and give our politicians and business leaders the confidence that will serve them well. Thanks.
Thanks everyone. And yeah, lots of great points covered today. The well-being indicators, what's happening with fuel efficiency standards, built environment case study for multi-level governance, but a whole report of potential there that we can tap into. So yeah, there'll be lots of exciting developments. And one thing I'm keen to see happen before the end of the year in terms of developing out our shared policy agenda for COP28 is bringing the experts in that have been playing a role with the US, the UK, European counterparts overseas for best practice on nature-based solutions, moving beyond carbon markets and offsets. So very keen to see some of those conversations happen, and hopefully we can bring in some friends from DECU, Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment and Water, potentially agriculture. Health working groups been talking about food and water, and yeah, other key players to really shift the conversation. And I know that the Council and Cities working group has been really trying to get some engagement, and that includes the councillor and mayor network on their asks. We did have a pre-election commitment from Minister Bowen, and hasn't really got a lot of traction there. So in particular, the difficulties of having a constructive conversation with Minister King. So I think there's a lot of opportunities just in even sharing ideas around who the right messenger might be. So maybe it is Denise, someone from Doctors for the Environment, that can work with the local governments to get that ask across the table. So I wanted to just give out a huge thank you to all of you for showing up today and all the work you're doing with the people in your sectors and networks. And I would strongly encourage each of you to capture any contacts or follow-up questions and actions from today. And hopefully I can support you in building out those into collaborative events, activities, meetings with decision makers, bureaucrats, and yeah, any launching, amplifying of new reports, responses to the budget, celebrating the wins. And yeah, very keen to follow up in conversation